for having me. I'm so honored to be here to share a little bit about the work of the CASA program and youth care overall. So Youth Care is a large nonprofit here in Seattle that serves youth and young adults who are experiencing homelessness. There's many different shelters and many different programs within youth care, and one of those programs, which is where I work, is Casa de los Amigos. So Casa de los Amigos is a residential program, and when we say residential program, it means that the kids in the program are actually living in the shelter, right? So they're not living with families in the community, they're living here in the shelter. And we serve kids aged 12 to 17, so it's pretty much the same age group as everyone in this room. The goal of the program is family reunification. So when kids cross the border, all of the kids are coming from Central America. They journey to the U.S., generally hoping to reunify with a family member here. And the goal of the program is to help process that case and reunify them as quickly as possible. Generally, their family members don't live here in Seattle or even Washington. They're living in other states like Texas, Florida, New York, Virginia, so really all over the U.S. And once their case is approved by the government, we're able to help buy that plane ticket and put them on a plane to reunify them with their family. They're with us an average of, I would say, 1 to 2 months, 1 to 3 months. Sometimes in really complicated or complex cases, they can be with us much longer, for up to 6 months maybe. And so this is really the first time for these kids who are, for the first time in their lives, apart from their families, living in a shelter. And so you can imagine how difficult it would be 1 month to be away from your families, right? Let alone 6 months in those complicated cases. While kids are in our care, they have access to case management. That means somebody at case manager is dedicated to helping them process their case to reunify. They have a therapist because many of them have survived complex types of trauma. They attend school on site. They have access to health care, access to legal services, and lots of recreational activities. So they're playing soccer every day, they're going to the gym, they're going to see Pike Place, Snoqualmie Falls, lots of different sites around Seattle. So a little bit about how the kids or how the youth come to the U.S. So all of the youth, I would say, not all of the youth, let's say 95% of the youth are from what we call the Northern Triangle of Central America. So this makes up 3 countries, so Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So you can see those just below Mexico, and they essentially, because of reasons that we'll get to, journey their way all the way through Central America, all the way through Mexico, reaching the border of the U.S. So this is often done on a combination of bus and foot and car. Sometimes the journey, depending on how quickly they can get there or how much money they have available, can take 1 week, would be a pretty quick journey, taking all the way up to 1 year for somebody maybe coming from Honduras who has to work their way up, going slowly, earning money as they go. Oftentimes, because of the violence in home countries, the youth decide to leave rapidly, and so in coordination with their parents or their caregivers in home country, they may say, okay, there's a threat to my life, there's a threat to my family's life, I have to get to the U.S. as quickly as possible, and so to make that happen, I'm going to go into debt, right? So the family will say, we're gonna take a loan out against our house in Guatemala, here's $10,000 so you can get to the U.S. So kids often your age arrive to the U.S. not only seeking safety, but with this burden of debt that they often feel obligated to help their families repay. There's a lot of different reasons that would cause somebody, a teenager, to migrate to the U.S., especially on their own. So normally when we talk about immigration, we talk about push factors and pull factors. So the push factors would be the ones that are pushing them to leave out of their country, right? So that would be things like widespread crime, widespread violence, particularly the gangs in Central America right now are very strong. It's different than gangs in the US because the gang violence is very widespread, and a lot of times the police in those countries are actually corrupted by the gangs themselves. So there's no rule of law that the police can help to enforce because the police are actually being bought off by the gangs. Oftentimes oftentimes poverty and food insecurity. So food insecurity meaning not enough access to food, oftentimes going hungry. We see a lot of discrimination, especially in Guatemala, because of the various ethnic and indigenous tribes. So most people in Central America, as you may know, speak Spanish. However, in Guatemala, there's actually, I believe, over 30 different ethnic tribes with 30 different languages. And a lot of those people, those ethnic and indigenous tribes, experience discrimination and experience less access to school. So those would be the push factors, right? Trying to get them to leave their home countries. And then what's drawing them to the US is often a family member, a close family member here in the US, who they've been separated from for a long time. It could be mom, dad, brother, cousin, aunt, uncle. So they want to reunify with this person, they want to seek safety, and more often than not, they want the opportunity and access to education, which they didn't have in their home countries. Unlike here in the US, where we have the benefit of free public education, in these countries in Central America, there's always a cost to higher education. So unfortunately, the kids have often been out of school for, I would say on average, 3 to 4 years. Also in terms of what's happening in the kids' home countries, Honduras and El Salvador consistently rank in the top of the world's leading homicide rates and are consistently voted as some of the most violent countries in the world, especially when we look at countries or when we take away countries that are not actively at war. So like, for example, if we remove Syria and Iraq out of the equation, El Salvador and Honduras will be right up there at the top. So once youth make their way all the way through Central America and they cross the border into the US, essentially what they're doing is they're asking for asylum. So they're saying, please help me, please give me safety, I can't return to my country, I need to be allowed into the US. And so with that appeal, they're put into the immigration system and, put into immigration processing. What that looks like at the border is being detained by ICE or by immigration, right? Immigration Custom Enforcement, which you may see on the news quite a lot. Kids are kept in a small room, very similar to this, called in Spanish the ice box, because it always has the air conditioning running, really for no other reason than to make it unbearable. There's no beds, kids essentially have aluminum blankets, no access to recreation, and limited food. By law, the youth or the kids are required to only be kept there 72 hours, and generally that's what we see. However, when there's a big mass migration, like you may have seen the Honduran caravan at the border recently, when there's a lot of people coming, it makes it really hard for them to process those kids quickly. And so sometimes kids can stay in this environment, sleeping on the floor for a week before they can be sent to a different kind of program. Once they're exited from immigration, the government will place them into group homes and into shelters, just like the CASA program all around the US. So within the immigration system, clients are required to attend court, and they're required to fight their legal case. So just because they've made it into the US doesn't mean that they will get to stay in the US forever. And so part of that is going through the immigration system and proving to the US government that they need to be allowed to stay here for their safety. About 90% of the CASA clients are screened eligible for a type of immigration relief. This means that about 90% of them have a really good chance of being able to stay in the US based on the trauma and persecution that they received in their home countries. The sad thing is about our current immigration system that, unlike the current criminal system where you have the right to a lawyer if you cannot afford one, the immigration system is different. So our US immigration system does not give the right to a lawyer for those who cannot afford them. So that means kids just like you, right, or even younger, just like this photo, have to be in court by themselves to try and fight their legal cases, which is obviously, right, an impossibility. So in those cases, a lot of those kids have to return to home country because they weren't able to win their cases without a lawyer. So fortunately, a lot of nonprofit legal services are really important for these kids in fighting their legal cases and winning their legal cases to remain here in the US. So some immigration terms, which you see or you hear quite a lot on the news. So all of these kids that we're talking talking about right now, all of the people fleeing violence and coming here to the U.S., we talk about them as seeking asylum. So seeking asylum really means when you're leaving your home country or you're being forced to leave your home country because you're being persecuted, because you're experiencing trauma, because you're experiencing violence. And so when people go to court to fight their legal case, they're asking the government to grant them asylum. The government has a choice. They can say, yes, we agree with you, you're granted asylum and you can stay in the U.S., or the U.S. government can say, we don't agree with you. Maybe you didn't have a lawyer, maybe you didn't make your case, and the U.S. government will say, you have to return to your home country. A refugee is also something that we hear quite a bit on the news. Refugees, normally when we're talking about people, coming from Africa or the Middle East, they're facing the same kind of condition, but their processing is done outside of the U.S. So when they enter the U.S., they already have their refugee status. They've already, kind of won their case, and they have all of their documentation to be here. The other way that a lot of these kids can stay in the U.S. is through a special juvenile visa. And in this, a child has to prove, or can, together with their lawyer, have to prove that they were either abandoned or abused by a caretaker in their home country, or maybe both mom and dad died, even though they were good parents, but they died, and so there's nobody left to take care of the child. And so for that reason, they had to come to the U.S. to join a sibling. And then migrant is something that we often hear on the news. Migrant is often talking about people who are coming to the U.S., so immigrating to the U.S. solely for economic reasons. So they couldn't find a job and they want to come here to the U.S. to find a job. It's generally not the type of kids that we're seeing crossing the border, right? So think about, for your own lives, what would make you leave your families here and cross over to Canada, right? Probably not finding a job, but maybe threats to your life or people in your family have been murdered. So despite going through various types of complex trauma, the kids in our program and youth from Central America have an amazing amount of resiliency. And it's really interesting and a privilege to get to know them and to get to provide them services. So oftentimes in our therapeutic groups or our therapeutic circles with the kids, we'll do values games with them and learn about the different values that they have in their lives. And we have a listing of maybe, 50 different values, right? Of things like honesty and self-esteem and friendship and peace and pretty much everything you can imagine. And for these kids, these are consistently the top 5 values that they rank. So family, religion, protection, humility, and responsibility. And I know for myself, right, growing up in America, thinking back to when I was a teenager, or even now, I know that these wouldn't be my top 5 values, right? And so thinking about the different way that culture impacts us growing up and how it really shapes our values. And then also a lot of the kids are coming to the U.S. not only seeking safety, but also hoping to continue their education and have the opportunity to fulfill their dreams here in the U.S. A lot of the common future goals that our kids have are being a doctor, lawyer, chef, architect, mechanic. It's really interesting. We get a lot of girls who want to be mechanics, which I think is a little bit different than in the U.S. Then oftentimes they also have a goal of helping to send money back to their families and provide for them. Even people who are 15 years old, right, 14 years old, feel a sense of obligation and duty to help support their families in home country. That's it. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I also put up my contact information if you ever want to reach out in the future. For doing this drive for us. Supplies like this really help to support our government funding, which is never enough. So the duffel bags are really important to us because when we get the approval from the government that a client can be reunified with their family and we buy their plane ticket, they need a duffel bag to put all of their things in. When they arrive pretty much with nothing, and so we provide them all the clothing that they need during their time here, and then they get to take that all with them. So thank you so much for doing that for us. Thank you.
Juice fundraiser, which is a really big fundraiser for us. Our goal is to raise $3,000 and help 23 teams with this fundraiser. So we're going to need 100% participation. The way it works is that essentially we'll request a certain number of these gift cards from Jamba Juice. We're thinking about requesting 700, and then we are going to need to sell those gift cards. They're $10 each. You can sell it to your family, your friends, maybe do like a school announcement or whatnot. And then half of the profits will go back to Jamba Juice, and then the other half we'll get to keep. So for each gift card, we'll essentially keep $5, and then Jamba Juice will keep the other $5. For any cards that we don't sell, those get returned to Jamba Juice. And we need, if we're going to reach our goal, we need every person to sell 6 cards. The fundraising committee came up with a policy where if you don't sell 6 for whatever reason, the cards that you don't sell, so let's say you sell 3 and you don't sell the other 3, you'll pay for half of those. So you'll pay for like $5 for each one that you didn't sell. And then that card will obviously get returned to Jamba Juice. If you sell 5 cards, you're going to get an entry into a raffle. And then for every card after 5 that you sell, you'll get an additional entry. So if you sell 6 cards, you'll get 2 entries. Again, this is a super big fundraiser, so it's really important that everyone participates and that you're responsible for your cards and for the money that you collect. And if you lose a card or you lose the money or whatever happens, then that's going to be your responsibility to pay back. So that's a little incentive to keep track of all that stuff. Coming up in the spring, we're going to have a Paint the Town fundraiser, but for now, this Jamba Juice fundraiser is our main focus.
I'm covering for Zoe, the membership update. So happy birthday for the month of January to Andrew, Lucy, Addie, Emily, and Sophia. The total hours to date are 1,136, and our top hours go to Annalise, Anna Gustafson, Charlotte Pang, Anna Roberts, and Gabby Scholl. We have 65 Assisteens who have completed at least 1 shift at the thrift store. So good job, everyone. And the people who have completed the shift requirement of 4 shifts for the year are Annalise, Anna Gustafson, Jane Hunt, Brody Johnson, Jane Johnson, Rose Martin, and then Charlotte Pang and Gabby Scholl again. So congrats to all you guys for getting the requirement done. We have 15 teams that only have 1 more shift until they're done with the requirement. So good job, everyone.
Right there.
So for the month of December, we spent a total of $672.76, and that was an accumulation of, we spent $230 on food in the last month, and then we also spent $366 for interagency. We spent money to get them a bunch of clothes and necessities that they wanted on their Amazon wish list, which Michael will talk about in a bit. And then we also raised $325 at our Barnes & Noble gift wrap sale, our little event. And then I'm going to do hospitality because Connor's not here. We decided in our little group that we're going to do on-sound bagels for our next
Awesome.
meeting. Okay, so the marketing committee did a lot of social media outreach for the Barnes & Noble event that we just had, the gift wrap event. So that was really great. I also encourage you guys to check out the Assisteens of Seattle's Instagram page. There's a lot of posts on there. You guys should give it a follow. And there's also a newly updated New Year's post. So you should check that out.
Drop a link.
Thank you.
everyone. For the philanthropic update, last month we bought a bunch of items off of Amazon for Interagency Academy, which is an alternative high school system that offers different supports. So some of the things we bought were socks, coats, underwear, what else did we do? Umbrellas, so that all went to them. And then we also did the Casa de los Amigos duffel bag drive, which was a success. And she talked a little bit about that program. So, thank you.
All right, and then for the monthly drives, the Rose and Kate, go present that one. Very nice.
So thank you for all the duffel bags. We got about 20 from a quick count.
Next month, we're going to do duffel bags again, and some places you can get them are at Goodwill, Amazon, Ross, and TJ Maxx.
Or if you don't want to buy them, you can look in your house or your school, ask some relatives, your neighborhood, ask some friends. So we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Alrighty, that was an awesome meeting. Great job with the posters, looked good. We have one more. Addie. Two updates coming up. Podium's all yours.
For March, we're going to be doing a book drive like we did last year. But for that, we're going to need a few volunteers to help decide like what stores we're going to ask for books from, and then also to talk about how we're going to get people to bring the most books. So if you guys want to help out with that, you can just put your name tag under here when you leave, and so that'll have like just one meeting in February so we can talk about that stuff. And also for that, it's going to be just new books this year, unlike last year. So yeah.
There's another one.
So for next meeting, the 7th graders are doing a bake sale. So if you want to bring a couple of dollars to support and buy a couple cookies and bake sale treats.
Alrighty. That concludes our meeting. Thank you for coming out, and remember to clean up all your trash. Make sure to clean up all your trash and stack your chairs in the back. Yeah, and now we're going to do the raffle. Hopefully put your phone in there, otherwise don't get away.
Oh, really?
The winner.
Right here?
That's me.
That's a start.
Congratulations.
And make sure that we're putting our phones in that bag because we didn't have everyone's phones.
It was like 5.
Yeah.
All right, please stack your chairs in the back and clean up your garbage. Thank you.